Hello and most welcome to Heidegger 1706. And we will continue with the article by Edmund Dain, An Attitude Towards a Soul, Wittgenstein, Other Minds, and the Mind. And we will continue where we left off at 1705. This text has a rather big typesetting, so we're progressing incredibly fast. We are already at page number 5. And we were just about to begin with the second paragraph. And we discussed other minds and that understanding that others have soul is very different from saying, for instance, I have a headache, or I have a house by the Belgian beach, or something similar. And it's the confusion of the grammatical likenesses that ends us with trouble. And I'd say that Wittgenstein is pretty much the only one that has this extraordinary different way of looking at things. It's popping up within neurology, that is true. Affordances is a bit on the way. But within philosophy, there is not any sign of it at all. And I say this is completely unknown in the general public. Mind for the regular man is something that needs to be proven or is in doubt. Edmund Dain and Wittgenstein says, no, this thing cannot be doubted. It's, how can I say, it's not grammatically constructed. It's not the way we use the word mind that it can be doubted. It doesn't have that quality. It's like looking at the sky. It's undoubtable. It doesn't make sense. I doubt the sky. Doubting the mind makes much less sense, even than doubting the sky. Could be some odd circumstance that you say there is no sky. You happen to be on Jupiter. But that doesn't go at all with mind. We continue, and we have the second paragraph, the sentence beginning with "so there seem," and I will read, let's see here, more at the bottom. I write risk, yes, somewhere there. Yeah, that'd be perfect, absolutely perfect. So there seem then to be some significant differences between what is involved in believing that someone so and so, some specific individual, is suffering, and whatever might be involved in believing in other minds, differences in the grammar of belief. In the two cases, and insofar as there are such differences, there is a question about what exactly believing in other minds involves, and about what are belief that other human beings have minds or souls consists in, and whether the term belief itself is appropriate here at all. And that is the question I want to focus on here. What I want to do in trying to address that question is to put aside for the time being the term belief, and with it the kind of assumptions we tend to make about what a belief is, and about what having a belief involves. And in turn, instead, to a distinction that Wittgenstein draws between having an attitude towards something and having an opinion about it. Attitudes and opinions. Wittgenstein draws the distinction between attitudes and opinions, between having an attitude towards something, in this case towards a soul or towards a human being, as Wittgenstein also puts it elsewhere. And having an opinion about it in the context of opposing the idea that we, as it were, merely believe of someone that they are not an automaton, that they have a mind or a soul, in the same sense in which we might believe of them that they are suffering. Wittgenstein writes as follows: I believe that he is suffering do I also believe that he isn't an automaton? Only reluctantly could I use the word in both contexts. Or is it like this? I believe that he is suffering, but am certain that he is not an automaton. Nonsense. Suppose I say of a friend, he is not an automaton. What information is conveyed by this, and to whom would it be information? To a human being who meets him in ordinary circumstances. What information could it give him? At the very most, that this man always behaves like a human being and not occasionally like a machine. I believe that he is not an automaton. Just like that, so far makes no sense. My attitude towards him is an attitude towards a soul. I am not of the opinion that he has a soul. Wittgenstein here contrasts the idea of an attitude with that of an opinion, contrasts the idea of having an attitude towards a soul with that of having an opinion that he, so and so, whoever so and so, has a soul. So what kind of contrast is that? I want to begin with the contrast between having an attitude towards something and having an opinion about it. Before turning to what having an attitude towards a soul or towards a human being in particular might involve. And I want to begin with an account of the difference between having an attitude and having an opinion that would, in my view, not locate the difference deeply enough. An account that would underestimate the kind of contrast that Wittgenstein wants to be making in this passage. And I want to do that as means of bringing out by comparison the kind of contrast that I think is involved here. So on one account of the kind of contrast Wittgenstein is drawing here, the difference between an attitude and an opinion would lie in the kind or the level of commitment involved. An opinion on this account would involve something, a claim that might or might not be justified on the basis of the evidence available to us, and that we are open to the possibility of revising in the light of the facts. But an attitude, by contrast, would involve a much deeper level of commitment. It would involve a claim that is much more fundamental to our way of seeing the world. Something that we are not, or not nearly as open to revising in the light of the facts. However, far those facts might fall short. of justifying such a commitment. On this kind of account, then, attitudes and opinions differ in terms of the kind of commitment each involves, in the way in which that commitment is reflected in our willingness to revise or revisit that commitment in light of the empirical evidence. But they are nevertheless still similar insofar as they both involve a commitment to a particular claim about how things are, which might be recognizably the same claim in both cases. For instance, the claim that such and such a person, so and so, my colleague, for instance, has a mind or a soul. As a result, we could, on this kind of account, paraphrase Wittgenstein's remarks as making a distinction not between an attitude towards and an opinion that, but between an attitude that, such as the attitude that so and so has a soul, and an opinion that. To the response to the problem of other minds to be drawn from such a distinction would then involve a simple insistence that attitudes, such as the attitude that so and so has a soul, unlike opinions, are not the kind of thing that stands in need of support in terms of the facts. or that might be revised in light of them, despite their similarity to opinions in other respects. It would involve what might be called a kind of head in the sand response to skepticism about other minds. There is a referral to the famous ostrich, of course. Against that kind of account, I want to suggest that the grammatical difference between an attitude towards and an opinion that marks a much more fundamental contrast between what is involved in having an attitude towards something and having an opinion about it. What I want to suggest is that having an attitude towards something and having an opinion about it are different kinds of thing entirely. They take two totally different forms. It is a contrast between, on the one hand, something, an opinion that involves a specific claim about how things are. A claim that can be evaluated in terms of truth and falsity. And that is at least potentially informative, and for which we might have or lack good evidence. And on the other hand, something that is not like that. Something that doesn't involve a specific claim about how things are. Something that isn't the kind of thing that is evaluated in terms of truth and falsity. Something that is not potentially informative, or for which we might have or lack good evidence. Getting a grip. An attitude then, as I understand Wittgenstein's contrast between attitudes and opinion, is not something that is like an opinion, only more deeply held. It is not like an opinion at all. But if that is true, if an attitude is not like an opinion in any of the ways noted above, what exactly, what is it like exactly? Can we say something about what having an attitude towards something actually does involve, and not only about what it does not? Elsewhere in part 2 of the philosophical investigations, Wittgenstein suggests that instead of looking for something that goes on inside us when we are certain of something, instead of trying to identify a feeling or some other kind of internal goings on, that constitutes our being certain about something. We should ask instead how our certainty is manifested in human action. Wittgenstein writes, "Do not ask what goes on in us when we are certain that, but instead, how is the certainty that this is so manifested in people's action? Our certainty in this sense, the suggestion is to be found not in some inner state, not in an opinion, however well supported by the evidence it may be, and not in some special kind of sensation we might have, but rather in human action or behavior, in what we do rather than what we think or feel. Our attitudes, for Wittgenstein, are a matter of our actions and our behavior. Of what we do in this sense, and what it is to have an attitude towards a soul, or towards a human being. Accordingly, is a matter of the ways in which we act in relation to a soul, in relation to another human being. What that involves, however, is not, or not simply anyway, a matter how we do act in certain circumstances, or what we do on any given occasion. It is not a matter of our responding to someone's pain in any particular case with pity rather than with indifference, for instance. So that the failure to respond with pity in any given case would in itself constitute a failure to have an attitude towards a soul. Rather, it is a matter of a whole complex of behavior. are what might be called a form of life, as Wittgenstein uses that phrase. Including not only the ways in which we do actually or typically behave, but also, and more importantly, the ways in which we can behave, which is to say, the ways which it makes sense to behave, given the tools we have at our disposal for making sense of one another's behavior. Given the kinds of things that it makes sense to say about someone's behavior. That aspect of what is involved in Wittgenstein's idea of an attitude, of what it is to have an attitude towards something, comes out in Wittgenstein's remarks in section 284 of the Philosophical Investigations. In connection with our differing attitudes towards what is alive and what is dead. In that section, Wittgenstein begins by contrasting the difficulties we might find in looking at a stone and trying to imagine it having sensations. Or being in pain, for instance, with what happens when one looks at a wriggling fly before going on to make the connection with our attitudes. Wittgenstein writes, look at a stone and imagine it having sensations. One says to oneself, how could one so much as get the idea of ascribing a sensation to a thing. One might as well ascribe it to a number. And now look at a wriggling fly, and at once these difficulties vanish, and pain seems able to get a foothold in here, where before everything was, so to speak, too smooth for it. And so too, a corpse seems to us quite inaccessible to pain. Our attitude to what is alive and to what is dead is not the same. All our reactions are different. If someone says that cannot simply come about from the fact that living beings move in such a way and dead ones don't. Then I want to suggest to him that this is a case of the transition from quantity to quality. If we take up Wittgenstein's invitation in the first paragraph here, if we look at a stone and try to imagine it having sensation, such as being in pain, for instance, the kind of difficulty we encounter is not that it is obviously false that the stone is in pain. For if there is no evidence that the stone is in pain, there's just as little evidence that it is not. And the kind of contrast between the stone and the wriggling fly is as a result also not that whereas the stone is obviously not in pain, the wriggling fly obviously is. The difficulty that we find in trying to imagine that the stone is in pain is that the concept of pain, our concept of pain, seems to have no application in relation to the stone at all. As Wittgenstein puts it, pain gets no foothold here, no purchase, no grip. The stone does not provide the kind of foothold that this concept needs for it to have any application. A stone, one could say, just is not the kind of thing that can be in pain or not be in pain. So when Wittgenstein invites us to look at the stone and imagine it being in pain, he seems to be asking us to do something that is, on the face of it, impossible. As if he were to ask us to look at the stone and imagine it, the stone, not being a stone at all. The kind of contrast here between the stone and the wriggling fly is not that the stone is obviously not in pain and the fly obviously is. The contrast between the stone and the fly is that the wriggling of the fly does provide the kind of foothold that the concept of pain needs if it is to have any application in relation to something. Where the stone provides no such foothold at all, the fly may or may not actually be in pain, but its being in pain is intelligible to us, where the stone's being in pain is not. And here it's time for looking at takeouts. So at page 6, it begins, so to speak, about attitudes and opinions. And here I will say the new one that it takes some to getting used to, and I will have to admit I'm still not there, is attitude. Whereas opinion is something that can be taken the value be true or false, and is, as in the previous example of the suffering colleague, it can be a small chance that it is fake, is feigning the pain. But an attitude has not that possibility. It cannot be true or false. It simply doesn't have that working in the world, in the life world. So he is making a distinction. The opinion, I do not think he is an automaton, is simply not a correct way. It's an attitude you have, and you have an attitude to others as they have souls. And Wittgenstein, very good color. I believe that he is not an automaton, just like that. So far makes no sense. I believe he is suffering. Do I also believe that he isn't an automaton? First one is a fairly decent use of the word believe. The second is utterly weird. And an attitude, it's towards, as we can see at page 8, the very end. That's the 4th line from the bottom. It is helpful. This Dain, Edmund Dain is helping out. Maybe we need to go to the 5th line from the bottom. As a result, we could, on this kind of account, paraphrase Wittgenstein's remarks as making a distinction, not between an attitude towards and an opinion that, but between an attitude that and explained as such as the attitude that so and so has a soul, and the opinion that. When we say that, and this is coming from Dain, it is almost a bit more substantial, whereas an attitude towards, it's like, if you have an attitude towards, it could be misunderstood that you feel something towards the stone, and the stone is not really participating, but it is strengthened. This is a pedagogical tool of Dain to help us strengthen with an attitude that. sort of pointing to it being something, being, having almost like an existence. And that helped me to understand. I had a look at it before. The stone is, how can I say this, is participating. Everything in the life world is participating. The Sprachspiel incorporates everything, and stones have already always been there. So they already have a certain, let's call it equality. And soul, being a soul or having a soul, just do not, as we can see in bit further up. Get a first clue at the bottom of page 10. At the bottom once more. Rather, it is a matter of a whole complex of behavior, or what might be called a form of life, as Wittgenstein uses that phrase, including not only the ways in which we do actually or typically behave, but also, more importantly, the ways in which we can behave, which is to say, the ways in which it makes sense to behave, given the tools we have at our disposal for making sense of another's behavior. So it's more in terms of what is doable, the action. And for me to understand this, I think it's helpful to think of Rudolf Pfeiffer's mobiles, the moving androids or robots. What would be in existence for these moving robots? Well, they don't have a brain, there's no CPU. So existence, it doesn't apply in this case. So for them, everything is, so to speak, action. They move about. This is how they have knowledge. There are no static existences. So the soul is not an existence that could sort of exist or not exist. It's there. And what about the stone then? Well, Wittgenstein says the word soul simply doesn't stick to it. It doesn't have a foothold on it. In the quote from Wittgenstein at page 11. Look at the stone and imagine it having sensations, one says to oneself. How could one so much as get the idea of ascribing a sensation to a thing? One might as well ascribe it to a number. And now look at the wriggling fly. And at once these difficulties vanish, pain seems to be able to get a foothold here, where before everything was, so to speak, too smooth for it. and is this foothold that is so important. The word soul, or pain at least, can stick to a wriggling fly, but not to a stone. May be helpful here. This is difficult, and I find it difficult as well. But may be helpful here. They are all interrelated from the very beginning. The stone hasn't fallen here from Jupiter, or, well, even worse, from some Everesian, Tegmarkian otherworld. We have a connection to the stone, as we have with flies, as we have with other people, human, soulful people. And therefore we have an attitude that could be extra helpful, or an attitude towards. And that is always already there, so to speak. It's always been there. Kalle, any opinions, my dear colleague, maybe?
I want to blaspheme. I want to blaspheme. Do you hear me?
Come again?
I want to blaspheme. I want to blaspheme.
No, come
Do you hear
again.
me? I blaspheme. Because I want to criticize Wittgenstein here.
You want to?
Criticize
Okay.
Wittgenstein here.
Yeah, sure, of course.
And this is the offending sentence. Look at a stone and imagine it having sensations. One says to oneself, how could one so much as get the idea of ascribing a sensation to a thing? You remember that we in Gothenburg, we had a native Indian visiting us. And I think he would say that the stone is living. I don't know if he would go so far as he would say that it's a living thing. No, I think or a living being, but he's that's we in the West who are drawing sharp contrasts. Of course, I get the metaphor of stone dead. It's in our language, but I think it's a deadly metaphor, so to say, a dangerous metaphor. Stone dead, these things. I want to actually quote something. This is. Can you see my document here? Do you see from Rovelli? Do you see Rovelli?
Yeah, I was thinking
Hans,
of
do you see?
Rovelli. Carlo Rovelli, you mean? Quantum
Yes,
relations.
you see this quote, this quotation of the document?
No, I can you?
Okay, let me share once more. Okay, so let me be sure. This is my bibliography. I'm collecting here the best quotations from every book that I read. This is from Carl Rovelli's Reality is Not What It Seems. The Journey to Quantum Gravity. Now you see it. I hope so.
Yes,
Hans?
yes, I see it. Yeah.
Okay, so and then I go. This is my bibliography, so I go now to quotation from page 113. If you look at a stone, it stays still. But if we could see its atoms, we would observe them constantly spread here and there, and in ceaseless vibration. Quantum mechanics reveals to us that the more we look at the detail of the world, the less constant it is. The world is not made of tiny pebbles. It's a world of vibrations.
Interesting.
So I would say that let me return to that Rovelli, native Indians would understand each other well, and they would, so to say, speak against Wittgenstein. And I think in this case, Rovelli and the natives would be right. I think it's dangerous to put these stone-carved boundaries, stone-clear boundaries.
Well, I agree, because as the Indian, our fellow, our friend, he has a different life world. And Wittgenstein says different life world means completely different realities.
Indeed, actually, I got an idea, and it's this quotation that we have discussed several times in the past by Wittgenstein about the lion. You remember you quoted it actually 1 week ago. Could you please quote it again? If a lion could speak, we couldn't not understand it.
No, it's very important, and even our friend, the Lakota tribesman, he mentioned when he travels to Southern California and meet other fellow Indians, their life world is so different. So their nature is not the same. Their things are not the same. So, of course, a lion, would he be able to speak? There would be no chance of us understanding anything, ever. Because its life world is completely different.
Indeed. To continue with, I don't know, I could go on about songs a long time because, but but we could quote Jesus about songs to songs speaks. You see the quotation from Jesus?
Yes, it's on Google.
Yes, it's
No, rocks could speak. It's almost like the vibrations of Rovelli.
yes. Nice. Stones would fly out. Would fly out. Let me see the quotation. Yes. Jesus said in reply, I tell you, if they keep silent, that is his disciples. The stones would immediately cry out. So the different translations here.
Yes.
You could actually see the KJV, the classic English translation, KJV. And Jesus answered unto them, I tell you that if these, that is his disciples, should hold their peace, the stones would immediately cry out.
Yeah, yeah. And there is a site from Hobbes, I think, the dead would scream. Something similar.
And I have a funny, let me see. This is from my native city. Let me see. This is slow. Borås, city of sculptors. This is my city where I was born, as you know, Hans. But then,
The famous textile town.
yes, indeed. So this is me. I'm speaking about this Bible verse, Bible 1914, because in this Borås city of sculptures, the sculptor, a local sculptor, quoted had quoted this Bible verse in the stone. That is, it's a publicity for his. You see, on that stone, you will see a quotation from Psalm 1914, 19 verse 14. That is, it's a publicity banner for the sculptor, stonemason himself. It's an excellent publicity for stonemasons. That is, even if everybody else would be silent, my stones, that is the stones that I, as a stonemason, create, they would immediately cry out. For a stonemason, Hans, stone is absolutely not dead.
Well,
And even for Michelangelo, that we both admire,
yeah,
I think he would be offended by Wittgenstein.
possibly, possibly, yeah.
Go and say to Miklas att they made David. No. They don't have the same senses as our dead material. Miklas will take his hammer and smash your face out.
Yeah. No, I don't think so. Being dead, as the deads are screaming out, being dead doesn't mean that you can't move. It doesn't mean that you can't speak. It doesn't mean you can't interact. And especially the poets and the artists been using that. It doesn't have that quality of being completely still or anything like that, I would say. But that's my take on it. But anyway, I think we should end here. Anything more?
No, I thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for listening in, everybody. And have a very pleasant morning, day, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are. Bye-bye.